So at this point, we are shifting gears in some fairly significant way towards policy-related matters, looking at the Internet from the perspective of legal, regulatory, and policy matters. And we have a star-studded cast of people to discuss their experiences and perspectives on this subject. And then after we have our break, we're going to dive into more technological view of things, specifically search and cloud computing, and then finally a look at potential future paths for the Internet. So it's my pleasure to begin this morning by introducing Andrew McLaughlin. Andrew is a colleague from quite some time now. He spent time as the Chief Policy Officer and Vice President of ICANN, and then joined Google in a similar role as our Chief Policy Officer. Andrew has had, I'm not going to go through your bio, Andrew, but he's had perspectives drawn from many different areas, but perhaps most important, he's done a lot of international interactions. So his perspectives are well beyond the domestic, and therefore even more important for a global system like the Internet to benefit from. His topic this morning, at least according to the chart here, is the net as a platform for democracy, and I sincerely hope that it has been and will continue to be, but let's find out what Andrew has to say about that. Good morning, Andrew.
So now we move to layers 8, 9, and perhaps 10 for the next hour and a half. I retitled the talk, Information is Power, so what happens when the network democratizes access to information? And I decided to go with a Star Warsian narrative structure to talk about it. And of course, I'm coming up on 40, and so Star Wars to me means episodes 4 through 6, not 1, 2, 3. I don't even know how to describe that narrative arc, and I won't try. So here's the backdrop for the story that I want to tell about the interaction between the network that we're all engaged in building and maintaining and human governance or democracy in some broad sense. The backdrop is what I refer to as my good morning email. Most of you probably have morning routines that are pleasurable. They involve coffee or orange juice, a run or something like that. My morning routine usually involves an extremely scary peek at my email to see what's come in the last 24 hours. And it's usually something like this. Extremely urgent, immediate priority response required, or else YouTube blocked in fill in the blank. And my sort of graphical representation of my mornings is this. And so, from the sort of Google side of things, I find that we're constantly running into governmental opposition. And what I want to do is try to explain why I think that's happening in almost every respect. When I talk about Google up here, I just mean the Internet. Google happens to be a kind of a noted avatar for the Internet these days, but the things that I'm talking about are fairly general to the network. So the narrative arc, of course, is A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and then Return of the Jedi. The New Hope is a broad set of trends and themes that the Internet has been fueling over the last 15 to 20 years. The most important one, of course, is democratization and decentralization of power. And this has been enabled because the cost of creating, the cost of distributing, and the cost of accessing information has plummeted. One of the things that's peculiar about working for an internet company is that you're in a declining cost business. Every year the same unit of capacity, the same unit of storage, the same unit of CPU processing power is cheaper than it was the year before. And so the ability of the average teenager with a Mac laptop to create incredibly professional looking quality videos and music and text is rather staggering. The kind of somewhat overly ambitious way to describe this is that we're seeing a shift from consumption culture to creation culture. The old Apple ad from 1984 kind of captured what most people felt about the last 100 years. But the media of distribution of information went from the the one-to-many mass passive infantilizing sort of mode to a much more interactive and creative mode. And I think it's because we're humans, it's not like there's not going to be a role for passive consumption of things mass produced by others, but we've seen a notable and I think quite an inspiring resurgence of individual creative expression enabled by, as I said, cheaper computing power, CPU processing, transmission, and more ubiquitous access. So I'm not going to go through all these because you're all internet people and you know what these are. But when I talk to audiences that are not composed of internet nerds, these are the examples that I show. I try to show people about DeviantArt, which is a great site that allows you to upload your artistic creations. Other people can buy them. People can comment on them, create communities, give encouragement. Wikipedia is obviously a great example of kind of collaborative sharing of information. Flickr. Prosper and Kiva are two sites that I'm quite high on because they enable peer-to-peer lending. Individuals. Prosper, for example, allows somebody who has money to find somebody who wants to borrow money, understand some basic data about what kind of a risk profile they have, and then make the loan. It's the kind of thing that in a pre-internet age would have been inconceivable at scale, and now it's a business. And Kiva is sort of the same thing applied to micro-lending, where people can give $100, loan it out to 3 different projects in 35 and then $30 units, and connect with people on the other side of the planet in a way that wouldn't have been possible. Obviously, the internet's democratizing the ability of people to speak. So you get all these awesome political blogs from the left and from the right. If you want to find out what's going on in Zimbabwe, you're much likelier to get an interesting and meaningful story from a blogger inside Zimbabwe than you are from the BBC Stringer based in Johannesburg. Music is something I care a lot about, and you can see just these kind of staggering productions of a 19-year-old sitting in a bedroom providing an curated look at an entire music scene with music files and analysis and so forth. Online communities are a sort of another expression of this. Twitter is the sort of fad of the day. The Twitter website that I've been showing, just because it amuses the hell out of me, is one that gathers text sent over Twitter that should not have been sent. It's an amazing site, actually, to take a look at. It's I'm sorry, what did you call this? I will now. Is it Twitter or? Right. If Carl is coughing, it must be time to move on. You never know what's going to be on there. You really don't. And by you, I mean me. There are these 3D worlds that, again, even 8 or 9 years ago, given what broadband cost, given what kind of data center costs were and so forth, it would have been inconceivable really to have something at the level of a real life 3D reconstruction of Dublin. Down here you can see this is a real life exact replica of me. In Dublin, here you can see my real life replica hitting on probably a 53-year-old guy from Los Angeles. But anyway, my point is that you get a lot. The economics are driving a tremendous amount of the democratization that we've been talking about for sort of 15 years more broadly. To me, the most exciting things, in the creation culture that's emerged on the net are remixes. So these are people taking bits of found text and repackaging them. And I think because I don't. Oh, will this audio hookup work if I plug it in? I'll just show you one. A particularly enjoyable one that I've seen lately, which is, oops.
On me, not any warning at all.
So let me just move it. So that, what I'm about to show you is just a couple of seconds of one of my favorite things out on the net right now, which is remixes that use. So that, for example, you can see the for some reason somebody thought that it would be fun to start a meme around 70s TV shows and their beginnings, but all swapped out with Star Trek and Star Wars and other images. So you can see like the beginning of the Love Boat, and all the special guests are from early episodes of Star Wars or Star Trek, including like Carl the Cylon and of course Charo.
Shall we say $1 million American dollars?
Death Star plans are not in the main computer.
Your mama's going on a date. Can you dig that? A date. Like a nice restaurant and some fine music.
This is a consular ship. We're on a diplomatic mission.
Dig that? If she's going with me, she's gonna have a good time. Can you dig that?
Look, man, I'm in the prime of my life. Got to live the way I got to. Gonna make me some money again. I'm gonna fight. I got my turn to be the champion of the world.
I'll let this go for 5 more seconds so you can see this particular.
God.
Darth Vader, only you could be so bold. The Imperial Senate will not still for this. When they hear you've attacked a diplomat...
Hey, look, man, I ain't fighting for no race. I ain't redeeming nobody. I quit on you when you cleared out of Detroit with Willie the Pimp. Yeah, you lucky I'm too busy to find you, girl. You selling my clothes, my ring, my silver brushes.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan.
Don't you papa me, girl. I'll papa you so you never forget it.
Anyway, you get the idea. The point is, this sort of thing presents is a really fun, amusing example of the kind of human creativity that's being enabled by the net, and that, by the way, presents a very profound challenge to copyright law. So everything that we've seen up there just now is copyrighted to some big important studio. I don't know who owns the copyright to the old James Earl Jones movies from the 70s, but it's probably not Lucasfilms. And so by mixing these things together, you end up with something which is transformatively new, but also a derivative work of some sort. It is certainly, in the view of those studios, probably tantamount to copyright infringement. Anyway, the last just thing that I want to mention in terms of creation culture is just a sort of cool thing to be excited about is witness, which is to say people filming the beatings of monks in Myanmar, filming the shooting of protesters in Tibet, filming police misconduct in the United States or the United Kingdom. We now have the ability to kind of do the citizen scale reporting that we were always very excited about. All right, so it's not just a few nerds. It's sort of the default experience for a teenager now to be able to speak to the entire world. When I think any of us were teenagers, or at least most of us here, you couldn't really get on the radio, TV, or newspapers, which were the only real mass media out there. Now, for somebody in high school, they can speak to the entire world. Potentially to everybody who's got access to the internet, which is increasingly close to the entire world. I will just mention that we're democratizing knowledge about the world. There's a staggering and impressive array of data that's now available on platforms like Google Maps. Here's a good one, the Beer Hunter, which uses Google Maps to help you find in Toronto the source of every currently open beer, wine, and liquor store with their hours and color-coded by what's open right now. So, a lot of important things are being done through Maps mashups. We talked about democratizing, or I've sort of alluded to about democratizing democracy itself and the governments. Because I think that's a pretty well-covered topic, I won't say much about it other than to say that, we're seeing moves to utilize commodity technologies, commodity computing platforms to make government more transparent, to make it more participatory, to make it more collaborative, to make it more efficient. That's a good thing. There is, of course, a dark side to all this democracy, too, which we have to acknowledge. I mean, you can look at the website of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade and see, glorifications of people who have blown up dozens of innocent civilians at a pizza parlor. You can see Stormfront, for example, which is a community for racists. So if you dislike blacks, Jews, or whatever, here's a community where you can find other people, talk to them, post things, and feel part of a larger group. But in general, I want to say it's basically a hopeful story about what the technology is enabling. So that's the new hope part. The Empire Striking Back is something that I'm going to touch on just a little bit later in a little gory detail, because we're a technical group and I want to talk a little bit about the technology by which this is happening. But the Empire Striking Back touches on Google in all kinds of different ways. I just pulled out a couple of examples of things that we've experienced in the last couple of years. Google Web Search is subject to censorship in all kinds of ways, and it's not just in China. So China's the most obvious and kind of best example, but mature, sophisticated democracies, Germany, France, India, Brazil, these are countries that have censorship rules and censorship regimes, and they're validated by a democratic process. So you can't simply say that the free flow of information is being blocked by nefarious governments. There are actual differences of values among cultures that we have to struggle with. And when you embrace democracy, you also have to embrace the idea that those values will be expressed through law, through regulation, through policy. So Germany's got a unique historical experience, and its people have regularly revalidated a social consensus in Germany that pro-Nazi speech, extreme violence, glorification of war, these things are illegal and should be prohibited. They don't even care if it's effective or not. It's a form of social expression of disapproval, and it matters to them on that basis. We recently had a blow-up in South Korea, where the South Koreans have implemented a new rule that requires real name verification for online speech. So if you want to upload a video to YouTube or you want to comment on it, their requirement would be that uploaders or commenters have to go in and provide and verify their real names and their national ID numbers before they can write anything or upload. And so to our cultural way of thinking, this is a flamboyant violation of privacy because it violates the notion of anonymous speech. And we kind of think about privacy as being often rather synonymous with anonymity, or the non-identification of yourself with things. And in Korea, their logic was if you require everybody to be logged in and use their real names, then when someone violates another person's privacy, you know who to track down and go get. And it disincents people from violating each other's privacy. Anyway, there are many, many different examples that I could point to about where the empire is striking back, where those who have built their power around the control of information in the pre-internet age are trying to extend that control into the internet. So from my way of thinking, there's an important set of commonalities among some of these big actors. So if you think about movie studios, TV companies, a state mapping agency, a book publisher, record producer, these are all institutions that have exercised control over the distribution of information. To use Eric's term yesterday, they depend on some form of scarcity in order to make money, in part. So what they also have in common, by the way, is that they've traditionally had both a venture capital function and a distribution function. So think about movie studios. The venture capital function is you put money down on the table to get a movie made, and then you profit from it above your investment. They also had control, though, over distribution of that movie in a world of scarcity. The scarcity comes from the fact that there's only N number of movie screens in the country. There's only N number of seats or N times whatever number of seats in front of those movie screens. If you're going to make money, the only way you can make money on your movie is to get the movie on the screen in front of the seats and have people collect money in order to go see the movie. The internet has blown that apart. But the same model applies with books, records, TV shows. In TV, it's a certain number of channels, certain number of hours in the day. If you can't get your show into one of those slots, you can't make money. With records, it's bin space. With books, it's shelf space. If you can't get your book on the bookshelf, you can't sell it, and you won't make any money. So the internet has blown all of that wide open. It does not jeopardize the venture capital function. It just makes it a hell of a lot riskier because of the way that you could use distribution to ensure some minimal amount of revenues. I mean, even the biggest turkey films, you could plan on marketing the hell out of and getting some amount of your money back, even as you hope for a hit. So anyway, these institutions are trying to figure out how to maintain the control and that they've had over distribution. In many ways, it means they're trying to recreate scarcity on the internet where there has been none. So to me, that's the kind of Empire Strikes Back phase. And the question, the sort of Return of the Jedi question is, is there a way to try to maintain the things that are great about the internet and still meet to some acceptable degree the demands of these threatened institutions to preserve some role for themselves in the new world. Some, by the way, just shouldn't, right? Like, so for example, a state mapping agency in India, which under Indian law has a legal monopoly over all maps distributed in India, that just simply should not be allowed to continue. There are others, however, like I think book publishers, who have performed very valuable social functions, or newspapers, and will continue to perform valuable social functions, and for which a role needs to be made. So just to sort of wrap up, we've got these kind of like big forces that I've mentioned already. Information is power. The internet is democratizing access to information. Democratization is another way to say disruption. The internet is disrupting these modes of social organization. We're seeing a consumption culture shift to a creation culture. And the last one, which will sort of set us up for the panel, is we've got a borderless internet and yet a paradigm of the application of law that is very bordered. So you've got chunks of territory defined by lines on a map, and within those borders a particular set of rules apply. And as I said earlier, many of them are actually democratically constituted rules that present a threat to the free flow of information that the internet has. Now, if I can just say sort of a word or two about, at a sort of theoretical level, it's important to think through kind of the sort of values question. So what I mean by that is when we talk about these problems of a conflict over control as it applies to the internet, what values are in play? In other words, when somebody is trying to exercise control over the internet, what value are they trying to vindicate? And this is just sort of a short list of some of the options. You might be trying to vindicate individual liberty in order to sort of preserve the freedom of individuals to do what they want. You might be trying to preserve a kind of ordered liberty, which is to say you preserve the freedom of individuals to do what they want up until the point at which they conflict, an individual's interests conflict with those of others. You might be trying to promote tolerance and coexistence. And this is actually a very interesting one. If you think about India, to massively oversimplify but maybe convey a grain of truth, the Indian conception of the state is a conception that's all around tolerance and coexistence, not the flourishing of individual tastes and preferences in an atomized kind of way. So when Google runs across this, it's because there's a video that, for example, parodizes the Mahatma Gandhi. So there's like a Gandhi striptease video. And even Indians that that I would find to be typically very simpatico, which is to say Western educated, or grown up in multiple cultures or whatever, they will generally agree that things which offend different religions or offend the sort of icons of the Indian state or society should be censored, because the alternative is people killing each other. So it's just a view that, like, why would you care about blaspheming Muhammad when the outcome of that could well be riots on the streets of Mumbai in a week's time. And so it's just a different conception of kind of what society is about. It's not so much the vindication of the individual, but tolerance and coexistence. And so you might be trying to exercise control over the network to achieve that. The Chinese argument is political, social, economic stability. We need to exercise control over the network to maintain social cohesion and the economic growth that has improved their lives so much over the last 30 years. It might just be maintaining power. We need to control the network because we don't want an opposition to form, and we need to stay in power. Suppression of unwanted actions or beliefs or creeds or faiths. This is kind of the Germany example. Suppressing Nazi speech is an important value to them. Another way to think about it is the vindication of democratic judgments. You might say the network should be regulated in whatever way that the democracy and the people, having voted or chosen their representatives, decides. So anyway, I list all those because I think there's this interesting question about whether the internet itself embodies a normative value. In other words, we've seen this rhetoric over the last 20 years, really, that the internet is in and of itself an embodiment of a conception of individual freedom, individual liberty, the right to express, the right to read, the right to hear, and that there's something unique about the architecture of the internet that makes this so. I actually think you can make a pretty good argument that that the way the internet has been built, whether you kind of use as a shorthand the end-to-end argument, the idea that the endpoints are the ones where the intelligence resides, that embodies a notion of kind of individual autonomy and freedom that will come into conflict with cultural preferences or some of these other normative values that societies may quite legitimately decide that they're going to pursue. So, a way to think about this is that, there's a kind of like architecture point, which John Gilmore has expressed as saying the net interprets censorship as damage and routes around it. In other words, getting packets to their destinations is the highest normative value of the internet. Packet starts here, packet gets there, and the network's job is to deliver it. That's its value. It is content neutral, content blind, but that's the normative value it embodies. Another way to think about it is sort of an anti-geographic point. In other words, the value of the internet is that it disrespects geography. I can, Skype with my wife across the planet in near real time, and the fundamental value of the internet is that it does not stop or slow down for national borders or try to instantiate local values. The one I kind of like is just the idea what the internet as an architectural matter does, and therefore bleeding over into sort of the world of normative values, is locates power at the edge. In other words, it's at the application layer and with the endpoints of the network that real power lies. And the network itself doesn't interpose itself between me and the people I want to communicate with. So, so then if you do kind of a formula here, you've got your distributed architecture, you've got geographic ubiquity, you've got democratization of production, distribution, access. What does that all equal up to? Well, it equals up to, at the moment, a hell of a lot of conflict and a lot of fights over control over information and the ability of the internet to meet it. What is the proper role for governments in this formula? Well, one that you might say, one answer that you might give is to advance some normative values. So if you're China, your job as a government is to try to maintain social stability and to make that true on the internet just as it is anywhere else. I think that there's another argument that you can make, which is that the role of the governments is basically to hold the network together. So not to screw up the thing which has generated so much creative expression, economic growth, and so forth, and to think about its job as making sure that the internet does not collapse on itself. And so you might be able to meld these two together and say advance your normative goals, but only insofar as you're not actually threatening the ability of the internet to maintain a globally interconnected network. So I think I'll close there. I'll just note that there is a tremendous amount of sort of pressure on Google, and I think if we think about the panel next as being a place where we can talk about some of these applied principles, I won't go into them in detail. Let me just mention one thing. Whoops, let me just collapse this. Oops, there we go. Let me just mention one. Whoops. That didn't work. Well, anyway, we'll focus in on China. I just want to mention, just a couple of sort of details about how censorship. This, by the way, is just a list of countries that are doing censorship right now. These are just the ones that I've run into in the last year. And so, you'll note a significant number of actual democracies on the list. I just want to, say a couple of words about what's happening in China, just because we've, sort of touched on it in this room a little bit yesterday, and I think it's worth talking about. So. This is an example of how a government that is seeking to vindicate a set of normative values that are in conflict with the internet can go about doing it. And by in conflict with, I mean jeopardizing the basic interoperable nature of the network and the principle of decision-making at the edges. So the Great Firewall, or as the Chinese call it, the Golden Shield Project, uses a couple of just basic censorship techniques. They do straightforward IP blocking of hosts at the ISP level. They do this on all kinds of different protocols. They just don't allow packets to advance toward a particular set of IP ranges. They do DNS blocking. They block DNS lookups of various descriptions. They use DNS poisoning and redirection so that they spoof destinations on the internet and interrupt interrupt the flow of packets that you were intending and replacing it with something else. There are a number of search-specific censorship techniques that they use. They pay attention to the queries that are being sent to Google. They use packet and keyword filtering across all protocols. They use the TCP reset tactic, which is a particularly, from my perspective, kind of sleazy and troubling misuse of a standardized interaction where they will just decide that a certain number of queries from a particular subnet is unacceptable, send out TCP reset packets. This is a big problem at universities and internet cafes where a single bad user in their view, a troubling user, can lead to the entire subnet being knocked out for 30 minutes. You can, of course, set your machine to ignore reset packets, but most people don't because it would not be a standardized way of behaving. The administrative mechanisms are very vast and complex, and we don't have time to talk about them, but an interesting thing in China is that they really are obsessively focused on what we call the 3 T's and the 2 C's. It's Taiwan, Tibet, Tiananmen Square massacre. The 2 C's are the cult, meaning Falun Gong, or what they describe as a cult, and the control of the Communist Party. So when you touch on one of those forbidden subjects, you will trigger one of these mechanisms of information control over the network. If you don't, generally speaking, they leave you alone. And so either that's encouraging or that's troubling because it's either a pretty broad set of important political topics or it's a small set of relatively unimportant things, depending on your point of view. So I just raised this because it's an interesting example of some of the standardized behaviors that we've been talking about can in fact be hijacked by governments that want to exercise some form of control for their own purposes. So with that, I think we should turn to the panel. Let me just say, by the way, there are a lot of ways to talk about these kind of control impulses, child protection, privacy, network regulation, and the open internet. The question of security I should have put on this list. There are lots of arguments that you can bring to the table for why elements of control need to be built into the network, but I think we'll talk about that in the panel.